Hi, apologies for the weird lighting. I don't know, I think it's because the tree is behind me, so everything looks a little bit yellow, but whatever, we're just gonna do it. This is where I'm set up, this is where all my books are, and we're just going for it. I can, however, pull you closer. So we're just gonna go for it. This is my November wrap up, and if you will recall, I had a huge amount of books on my November TBR. I just did all the calculating, that's why I have a pencil in my hand. Originally I had 27 possibilities for the Bloomin Readathon. I had 22 possibilities for Nonfiction November, and I had 11 possibilities for Indigathon, which all added up would equal 60 books on my TBR for November. And when all is said and done, I have finished an actual 31 books. And I have 4 still on the go, which I will finish in December. They'll end up being part of December's wrap up because I am well into them, but will not finish them. Even now, I should be writing a paper, not making this video, but you know, I'd rather make the video. So here I am. I've completely run out of time, and I know I will not finish these 4 books in November, even though in a normal month, I would have just pushed and gotten it done. I'm gonna be nice to myself. I'm just gonna let it roll over. So these are the 4 that I'm still finishing up and loving all of them. A Season of Second Chances by Jenny Bayliss. I am finally, after many years, reading The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. Praying with Jane Eyre. I did start yours truly. I am not very far into it. I am only on page 52, but I will finish this pretty quickly. It'll be one of the first books that I finish reading in the month of December. But those are the 4 that are gonna keep going. Now, like I said, I should be writing a paper right now, but I'm not. I'm gonna very quickly go through the books that I read for the 3 different readathons. I almost said read-alongs. Read-alongs, readathons, reading challenges. Whew. Deep breath. I'm gonna quickly go through the books that I read for Bloomin Readathon. I didn't get, in the end, I didn't get a bingo, even though I filled out tons of the bingo card. Indigathon and Nonfiction November. So for Indigathon, I had 4 books that I listened to on audio. I didn't have physical copies of them. The first one is Carrie. Carrie was, I think I gave it 4 stars in the end. It is a series of essays, a memoir about stolen land, about concealed weaponry, about being a woman. It's a very well-written book. It didn't stick with me like I thought it would. I thought it was really impactful while I was reading it. And maybe that would feel different if I had a physical copy of the book. I'm not sure. I did really enjoy it, but again, didn't really stick with me. Isn't with me now. It was one of the first books that I finished in the month. I listened to Lakota America. This was really long. I listened on 2 times speed. It was fascinating. There was a great deal of very it feels very scholastic, and yet also it was very interesting. So I recommend it. I don't know that I would have gotten through it if I was reading a physical copy of it. Like I said, it's very scholastic, it's very academic, but I do highly recommend it. An American Sunrise. This is a collection of Joy Harjo's work, and I had read like standalone poems like here and there by Joy Harjo, but I had never read a collection, and I really enjoyed this. I listened to it, which I think was not the best move, but I didn't have a physical copy and I wanted to experience it because I also read Joy's brand new memoir. And so I was listening to those poems and reading the memoir simultaneously. Well, not simultaneously, but like I was doing them both. And then Fatty Legs, which was an excellent memoir geared at middle grade readers about the author's experience in Canada being in a boarding school, being in a native boarding school. And then this was the group read, Apple in the Middle, and I DNF'd this book. I read a good chunk of it, but the writing was terrible. I feel terrible saying that. I am not sad that I purchased this book because it is, supporting a Indigenous author, but it needed an editor, like a copyright editor. There are so many typographical errors in this book that it was very distracting for me. The storytelling, like I teach middle school and it felt like it was written by a middle schooler, and I don't believe it is. It didn't feel, from the very beginning, it felt, I don't know, I can't think of the word for it, and I think I'm being super cautious as well. Because it was the group read. It was a book that I read or chose to read for Indigathon, and I really thought it was very poor quality, like on all levels. So I did DNF this one because there were so many other books that I had and I didn't want to struggle through it. I will put this in my classroom library though, and perhaps middle schoolers will have more patience for it than I did. I read The Sea in Winter. This was excellent. This is my second Christine Day book. I actually teach a Christine Day with my 6th graders. The first book that we read together in 6th grade is I Can Make This Promise by Christine Day, and this is The Sea in Winter. It was, like I said, excellent. I highly recommend this book. It's a middle grade book, but it has big themes in it. So if you are a parent, this is a great opportunity to have conversations with your child. So highly recommend this book. And then, like I said, I read Poet Warrior by Joy Harjo. This is one of my top 5 books of the year. This is amazing. It's a slim little volume, but it packs a huge punch. It's written partially in verse and partially in narrative. It has photographs, and it is transcendent. It transcends genre. It transcends time and space. It transcends the physical. It is, in short, exquisite. It's exquisite. So I highly, highly recommend Poet Warrior by Joy Harjo. You will not be sad you pick this book up. Next, Nonfiction November. I read and loved Charles Dickens' A Life by Jane Smiley. This was superb. It's very short, and it will be the book that I recommend for people who pick up their first Dickens or people who want to know more about Dickens. I read The Indifferent Stars Above. This was an incredibly difficult read, not because it's not immersive, but because it's immersive, not because it's not conversational, but because it's conversational, not because it's not researched, but because it's researched. This was excellent. I feel like I keep saying that, but it was excellent. It was excellent, excellent, excellent. It is by Daniel James Brown. I teach a Daniel James Brown book with my 7th graders. I teach The Boys in the Boat, which you probably have heard of. But this is about the Donner Party. Specifically, it doesn't say this, but really specifically, although it tells you the fates of all the men, it's about the women in the Donner Party, and the children in the Donner Party. And it is heartbreaking and, like I said, immersive, so prep yourself. But so well written, so engaging, such a quick read. I read it slowly because it was hard for me to keep going back into it. Excellent. Just everything he does is golden. So Daniel James Brown. So good. I read The Old Ways by Robert McFarlane. This was the pick for my In Real Life book club. Chose this for this month's read, and I was all for it because I do enjoy Robert McFarlane. I love walking. Part of this is an exploration of a place in Tibet that I myself have been, and then a lot of it is set in England, and I love England. It was hard for me to get into it right now, though, and I think that there are several reasons for that. One is that it felt more like a summer read to me, something that I would rather read in the summertime than in the wintertime, although it is not set in any one season. The other was that I had so many books to read, and I was really kind of relying on the faster pace of books to keep me going. And so these really kind of slow, methodical, meandering, meditative, reflective books made me feel impatient while I was reading them. And so I would say that I skimmed the majority of this book, and thus, although I think I gave it 3 stars, I do believe that it is, in a different time, in a different place, probably a 5-star read from me, just not right now. I read my very first Karl Ove Knausgaard book, Autumn. I will not continue with reading Karl Ove Knausgaard books. This was great. It was great for what it is. But it is a series of very short, seemingly unrelated mini essays on different things. From like a plastic bag to going to the bathroom. Like it's all there. And there are moments where it achieves absolute greatness, but I struggled to care from one thing to the next. They're so short and there are so many of them that by the time he had built within me a desire to care, it was over and I had to build a new desire to care. And yeah, it didn't work for me. It just didn't work for me. And I will not continue reading him, not because I don't think he's probably brilliant. It's probably brilliant. There are probably people out there who are like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I don't. Fine. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I know for me, this doesn't work. I read The Marriage Bureau. This is by Penrose Halson. It is the true story of how 2 matchmakers arranged love in wartime London. This was excellent. It's chatty. It's engaging. Penrose Halson is the owner of a new iteration of the original Marriage Bureau, and she was also decades ago, she was a client. And so she has access to a lot of information and resources to tell this background story of this company so very well. It's also the story of London in wartime, and it's the story of women and independence. It's really good. It's really, really good. I highly suggest that anybody who has an interest in curious history or World War II history or is an Anglophile, I suggest you read this. Read this weird one. This is Oneida by Ellen Wayland Smith. Ellen Wayland Smith is the great-granddaughter of a couple who were in the upper echelons of this free love cult from the 1840s, East Coast of the United States. I don't want to tell you too much. Maybe that's enough to get you to read it. It's very well written. It's extremely well researched. It is a little bit sensational, but like, how do you write about that kind of thing without it being a sensational sort of story? Oneida is, the #1 manufacturer of tableware in the North American hemisphere. And they started as one man's odd interpretation of biblical scripture and his feeling of being like left out of society. So, and all the people who jumped on his ship. It's weird. It's real weird. It's very, very weird. But it's also incredibly interesting. Very well written. I highly recommend this. If you like reading about cults, if you like reading about communes, if you like reading about American history, if you like reading about curious things, once again, if you like tableware, I can't suggest it because it doesn't talk that much about tableware, but it talks about all the other things that went into it. So yeah, and again, once again, it's It's by somebody who wasn't there, because by the time she came on the scene, by the time the author came on the scene, all of the weirdness was well hidden, but by someone who is the blood of someone who not only was there, but like helped make it happen. So super interesting. I read The House of Gucci, A Sensational Mystery of Murder, Madness, Glamour, and Greed by Sarah Gay Forden. I will be the first to tell you that I read this just because I wanted to read it before I watched the movie. I haven't watched the movie yet. The book was hard for me to get into. I didn't care. Part of that is because fashion is not something I really care about, but I thought that, I'm very intrigued by the movie commercials, and the book does tell that story that I'm seeing hinted at in the commercial for the movie. And like I said, I haven't seen the movie yet, so I don't know what it's going to cover, but there's so much context setting in this book. There's so much background information. There's so much focus on like, and this is when they created this style, and this is when they created that style, and I don't care about any of that. I wanted more of the sensational story of murder, madness, glamour, and greed. I'm sure it's a fine book. It just wasn't of interest to me. I am glad that I read it. I'm glad that I finished it. I feel prepped to watch the movie now, but the movie was my real interest, and I was hoping that this would grab my interest. I probably never would have picked it up otherwise. It didn't. That's that. I read The Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship by Katherine Ryan. This is such a beautiful book. It's such a beautiful book. So where McFarlane, with his slow, reflective, meditative process, lost me, this one slowed me down. I would pick it up and I'd be in like the frenzy I'm in now, knowing that I have 700 things I should be doing, but I'm picking up this camera. I would pick up this book and just like sink into it. Just it was so beautiful. I have a really hard time reading about animals. And I think I said in another video that this is not an unhappy book. Like, sad things happen. But I know the fox is loved and never purposefully mistreated. And so I was able to get through the hard things. There are other hard things that happen to other animals, which were also quite difficult to read, but always I know this author, Katherine Ryan, is a kind, gentle individual and is honoring and respectful. If you don't have any problems reading about animals in danger or in pain, you're good to go. If you do, I still think you're good to go. I have a very low tolerance for that, and I was able to do it. Catherine Raven, did I say Ryan earlier? It's Raven. Catherine Raven is a former National Park Ranger at Glacier, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Voyagers, and Yellowstone National Parks. She has a PhD in biology. She has a degree in zoology and a degree in botany. She's a member of Mensa. She's amazing. She's also neurodivergent, and you can tell that in the way she tells her story. It is so beautifully written, but also through the eyes of someone who sees the world very differently and has very different expectations for how people will interact with each other and with animals, and how animals interact with animals. And it's just phenomenally written. I cannot recommend this book enough. Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship by Catherine Raven. I listened to, because I could not read, England's Magnificent Gardens by Roderick Floyd. I don't know how to say his name. How a Billion-Dollar Industry Transformed a Nation from Charles II to Today. This is full of fascinating information. It is full of amazingly beautiful photographs and prints. It is the dullest piece of writing I have ever tried to read outside of a textbook in my entire life. I had to get it on audiobook. Like I said, the information is fascinating, and it is told, I'm gonna sneeze, it is told in such a boring way. I will keep this because it's a good reference book. The bibliography is amazing. The index is amazing. The images are amazing. It is beautiful. I will never be able to read it again from cover to cover. I hope that someday somebody will write a similar book. This is the only book I know about this, that I know of that exists. I hope somebody will write something much more accessible. This was unnecessary. That's all I will say. It was like reading someone's dissertation, and maybe it was someone's dissertation. I don't know, but it felt like reading someone's dissertation. I have to sneeze. I read from cover to cover. Now, I have peeped into this multiple times, but I read from cover to cover Anne Frank's Diary, the graphic adaptation, adapted by R.A. Fulham and illustrated by David Polanski. This was beautiful. Some of the images, I wish that I was able to frame them. They are just outstanding. And there's like worlds within them, and if you spend time with the pictures, like you can just get lost in some of them for such a long time. Adding the way that the artistry is added to the text really brings an just really, really gorgeous. And if you're looking for a gift, I highly recommend this. So well done. Takes nothing away except maybe the bulk of the actual diary. So maybe give them together as a gift. This is what I read and finished for the Bloomin Readathon, which was so much fun. I loved it. It made me read things that I've been meaning to read for a really long time, and things that I wouldn't necessarily have wanted to pick up, I wouldn't think, in November, but I did. And so this is what I read. I read The Wish Book Christmas by Lynn Austen. This was my very first Lynn Austen. I didn't realize that this was the second or third in a series. Nowhere on here does it tell you that. You can read it as a standalone, as I did, but there comes a certain point in the story where there's resolutions happening, and they feel so much bigger than this book, and I was so confused. I was like, I didn't know that one small event carried that much weight. And it doesn't. It's because this book is like a companion, I guess, to a book that came before, which I have never, and probably now will never read, knowing what I know from this one. So if you have no intention of reading the other book, which is set in World War II London, I suggest that you start with The Wish Book Christmas by Lynn Austen if you're looking for a feel-good Christmas book. There is also a moment, this is Christian fiction, and for the most part, it's not like it's accessible by anybody from any faith. There is one part near the end where they're in church and the sermon is definitely directed at the reader and not part of the actual storyline. I hate it when Christian fiction does that. It is one of the things that makes me reticent to read Christian fiction. And I'm a Christian. And I hate it when authors think that this is their platform. This is not your platform in that way. Christian authors, take note, that is not effective. That's not an effective way of sharing your faith. Stop it. All it does is make people, like me, avoid your books. So, with the exception of that one moment and the fact that I had no idea that this was next in a series, I do highly recommend this. It is about two best friends who are raising their two sons without their husbands, because their husbands died in the war, and how they are trying to have a meaningful Christmas with their sons. And it's beautiful. It's about relationships. It's about independence. It's about learning to rely on each other. It's about learning to give and accept gifts. It's lovely. It's a lovely, lovely, heartwarming story set in the 50s. It's adorable. But those two things might bug you. And if they do, steer clear. I hated this book. I still hate this book. I read the shipping news. I think it's beautifully written. Nobody can doubt it. It was not anything like what I wanted to read in November. It was dark, and all the characters are gross, and yes, there is a redemptive quality in the end, but it felt like too late. I hated it. I wanted it to be something that it was not. I read Adequate Yearly Progress, and I loved it. This is about teachers and the plight of teachers, and it's over the top, but it is also accurate. I don't know. It's by Roxana Eldon, and it's just very, very engaging, laugh out loud funny. super infuriating and frustrating at times, and very realistic. I read The Mistletoe Matchmaker. This is the next book in the series, which I always forget, the Farn Peninsula series by Felicity Hayes McCoy. These are just feel-good, like wrap you in a hug books, and I had read the first two earlier in the year. The third book is this one, and it takes place obviously in the winter, so I held off in reading them until now. I have another one of the books in the series on my TBR for December, so continuing on with that. Again, just like feel good, wrap you in a hug. Nothing super special, but like that's what's special about them. Books. I read Buffalo Girls by Larry McMurtry. I loved this. I thought this was so good. I am committed to reading Lonesome Dove next year, and I've never read it, and I've never actually seen the miniseries. I don't really know what the story is about, so I know it's a Western though. This was my first Larry McMurtry. I wanted to start with something a little less daunting than Lonesome Dove and make sure before it's too late to change course that I will get on with his writing, and I do. This is a book about an aging Calamity Jane. Half of it is like story, like narrative, and half of it is epistolary, as the character of Calamity Jane writes letters to the daughter that she doesn't know. And it's just a beautiful book. It's so beautiful, and sad. Then I had an impulse pickup, which was The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox, and this was pure joy, like pure joy. Absolutely loved this. It is silly and unbelievable, and it's about twin sisters who change lives for a hot minute. It's a lovely clean or closed door romance. Really lovely. Loved it. Absolutely enjoyed it. Read it so quickly. Loved every second of the reading. It was just what I was looking for in that moment. I read The Penny Pinchers Club by Sarah Strohmeyer earlier this year in response to the Librarians Pick My TBR librarian choice that I should read Evie Drake Starts Over, and me hating Evie Drake Starts Over. I made a video which was like, these books are better than Evie Drake Starts Over. These romances are better. Well, there are two Sarah Strohmeyer books on that list, on my list of books that are better. Both of them are retellings, contemporary retellings of fairy tales. I had never read anything else by Sarah Strohmeyer, so when I saw this in a little free library, I grabbed it, and I wanted to give it a try, wanted to give it a go, because I loved those other two books. And this is a contemporary romance, but it is not like the other two books. It was enjoyable. I did enjoy it. I feel like it's pretty dated. In fact, I kept thinking it was older than it actually is. I kept thinking, well, I have to make allowances because it was written in the 80s. It was not written in the 80s. It was written in like 2007 or something. But the overall story was enjoyable. I mean, I enjoyed the experience of reading it. You just have to kind of like take it with a grain of salt, I guess. There are better romancers. There are better romances by Sarah Strohmeyer, but this is, I think, unique in the romance world. Maybe I don't read enough romance to know, but I think it's pretty unique in that it's a romance between a married couple. So yeah. And I have one more that I picked up by her as well at the library, in the library bookstore. So I will read that one as well, but probably not until February. I read Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwood. This is a retelling of Jane Eyre set in, I believe, Nigeria, but it is a fantastical, like, it's a fantasy book. But the Jane Eyre character is actually a young Nigerian girl who has the power to exorcise ghosts and demons from people's homes. And so she gets hired under strange circumstances to show up at this house of this white guy who is living in this like mansion, but the mansion is notoriously inhabited by demons and ghosts, and there's lots of mystery there. Rochester and Jane are not named Rochester or Jane, but the Rochester and Jane characters within the book are not so age range apart. There might be a kind of like woman in the attic kind of storyline, but it is not his wife. And there is more attention to, how do I say this without ruining anything? There's more attention paid, and the storyline of Jane's orphanhood, I guess I'll say, is given more body, I guess I'll say. There is a lot, I gave it 5 stars. There's a lot of good going on with this. It is YA. It does definitely feel YA at times. But what this book has going for it is its originality. It's obvious that the author honors and adores Jane Eyre, but is able to make it her own. The dialogue in this book is wonderful. And the ending, I can't tell you anything about it, but the ending is satisfying, incredibly satisfying. I highly recommend this. I don't even think you need to tell people that it is a Jane Eyre retelling unless they already love Jane Eyre. Let them just go into it and read it on their own, and when they fall in love with it, then tell them, hey, you can read Jane Eyre. It's what that book is based on. I read An Irish Country Yuletide. I read this out of order when I realized that it's a novella and that it's set in the winter after the 4th book. So there was no information in it that about the characters that I wouldn't already know. So I went ahead and read it when I felt like reading it, and glad I did that. It is a novella. I read it, you could read it in one sitting. I read it in 2 short sittings. If you, I mean, I would only really recommend it if you already know and love Patrick Taylor's work. If you do not, and if you do, then it's so lovely. And if you know somebody who does, stick it in their stocking. It's so beautiful. But if you don't already have a familiarity with Patrick Taylor's work, then I think that there are better places to start. I read The Excellent Lombards. I so wanted to love this book, but it was weird. It was, I mean, the story is not weird. It was hard to tell what time period it was in. It was hard to, there were moments when the author, so she's writing from the perspective of a child, and there were moments when she really got childhood, and there were moments when she was totally wrong about childhood. And then there are also like subject matter in here that would be maybe the view of a child, especially a child growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s when this book is set, although I will say the book feels like it's set in the 1940s most of the time. They might view the world that way, but it's never addressed for the modern reader. For example, there's a lot of talk of the scalping of Indians in this. Scalping of Indians, quote unquote. There's just weird stuff. There's just some weird stuff like that. And I think that the author was trying to be true to the time period, but like I said, it's really hard to establish when that time period is. You'll be reading along and totally feel, like I said, like you're in the 1940s, and then she'll talk about like CDs, or make reference to music that came out in the late 90s. Like, it's just, it was not well done. It was not well done. I have not read, I know she wrote A Map of the World. I have not read A Map of the World. I know that had a lot of positive hype, but I will not read anything else by this author again, I don't think. I did not find her offensive. There are offensive things in the book. I did not think that she was aiming to be offensive, or even that she is uneducated about social issues, but I felt that the writing was not good. Speaking of Patrick Taylor, I read another Patrick Taylor. Not even going to talk about it. Loved it. 5 stars. I reread The Late Bloomers Club by Louise Miller, and I'm going to reread her City Baker's Guide to Country Living in December as well. These were also on that stack of books that I thought were better than Evie Drake, and I thought when I made that stack, I was like, ooh, I haven't read those since like 2017 or something, so I need to reread those. And I think I was a little bit afraid to reread them because I loved them so much. Late Bloomers Club was maybe even better than I remember. Really loved it. Highly recommend. And then finally, I read An Observant Wife by Naomi Reagan. Earlier this year, I read, maybe in August, I read An Unorthodox Match and absolutely loved it. Unorthodox Match is a romance set in an Orthodox Jewish community, and An Observant Wife is the sequel to that book. I did not realize there was a sequel, but when I saw it, I immediately scooped it up because I wanted to know what happened next, and that's exactly what the book is about. It's what happens to these characters next. But it is also about the ways in which enclosed communities can foster harmful behavior, can protect harmful behavior. Naomi Reagan has now, after just 2 books, become one of my favorite authors. and I cannot wait to read more from her. I think that she can maybe do no, or if not no, very little wrong in my eyes. She is a phenomenal storyteller. She is a religious author who is strong enough in her faith to question everything. And I absolutely love that. Her storytelling is beautiful and rich, but also deep. And I will read anything she puts out, anything at all. So now I'm about to go into her backlist. And Observant Wife is her newest release. So now I'm about to go into her backlist. I think she has like 6 or 7. I'm just gonna one after the other and read them. Absolutely adore her. I adore her writing. That's a lot of books. I just talked about 35 books. Finished 31 of those. That's a phenomenal reading month. I also read Beloved, a lot of short stories, as well as rereading On Connection by Kay Tempest and 2 of Kay's poetry collections, all for my graduate work. But I'm not going to count all of that for my reading, because I'm reading it in a very different fashion, in a very different pace, and for very different reasons. But I did do a Goodreads and an Instagram review of Beloved, if you would like to see that. And that's it. I don't know if I will read less or more in December. We'll have to find out. But I am going into December with 4 books from November that are priority. And I've also started reading one story a night in my Penguin Christmas short stories collection. And that is proving to be absolutely delightful and fairly disturbing. So I predict 5 stars for that collection. It's hard for me to, I'm reading one in bed before I go to sleep each night as like an Advent process. And it's really hard for me all day to not just pick up the book and read another story. So if that tells you anything about the quality of the stories and the way in which they have been chosen, so be it. Anyway, at this point, I'm really just procrastinating, so I need to go. Bye. You'll see me again soon. You're not going to have to wait till the end of the month, because I have a lot of videos that need to come out in December. So you'll see me again soon, maybe next week. If not next week, definitely the week after. Anyway, bye.